Celebrimbor, everything you need to know about this crucial character from the Lord of the Rings universe. Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Terry and this is Marvelous Videos. Celebrimbor, a significant character in Middle-earth's history, was introduced in The Rings of Power, the new Amazon TV series. It acts as a precursor, not to the Peter Jackson movies, but to Tolkien's writings. The series is based on Middle-earth's Second Age and is inspired by Tolkien's appendices and notes. The show features a mix of known mythology and new people. Celebrimbor is a skilled smith who will impact the destiny of Middle-earth more significantly than he can realize. He's introduced in the first 2 episodes. After all, the story is about the Rings of Power themselves, particularly the terrible One Ring that would one day fall into the possession of Frodo the Hobbit.
My own. As the first Dark Lord tortured and corrupted the elves, I will redeem them in flame. They will be mine!
Celebrimbor is the one responsible for all of this. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Now let's begin. Exploring the backstory of Celebrimbor and his impactful role in Tolkien's lore. Celebrimbor was the child of Curufin, Feanor's 4th son, and hence descended from him. Apart from his ancestor, Celebrimbor was one of the finest artisans in Middle-earth's history, and his crafting of the Rings of Power resulted in Sauron's reign and eventual destruction in the War of the Ring. Celebrimbor in Sindarin means silver fist, derived from Celebrin, which means silver-like, and Por, which means fist. Telpinqua, or Telperinqua, was the Quenya equivalent. Celebrimbor is really the cinderized version of Telperimpar, and the Quenya version Tielpinqua, according to the tales in which he had a Telerin background. Celebrimbor's early years are unknown, although he was born in Valinor and accompanied his grandfather and father into the Noldor exile on Middle-earth. His mother remained behind. He most likely retreated to Nargothrond in the aftermath of the Dagor Bragollach. He didn't, however, take part in Curufin and Celegorn's actions concerning Luthien, Beren and Finrod. He even condemned his father's actions and refused to accompany him when Orodreth exiled the 2 brothers from Nargothrond. Celebrimbor spent some time in Gondolin until after the sack of Nargothrond, working as a jewel maker for King Turgon. Perhaps Enerthil, the great jewelsmith, taught him this skill. By then, the very first Elfstone had already been formed in Gondolin by either Enerthil or Celebrimbor. He escaped the fall of Gondolin and probably fled along with the other refugees headed by Tuor to the Mounts of Sirion and ultimately to Balar. According to legends, during the Second Age, Celebrimbor fell in love with Galadriel, who was distressed by the condition of Middle-earth. Celebrimbor crafted another Elessar at her request, although it had less potency than the original. He was the ruler of the elven folk of Ostin Edhil at Eregion during the Second Age. He was also the leader of the Gwaithir Myrdain, an elf craftsman's society. Their prowess was so well known that they earned the respect and admiration of the dwarves at Khazad Dûm. Celebrimbor collaborated with Narvi the dwarf to create the Doors of Durin, which guarded the Dwarven Kingdom's west gate. Around the year 1200, Sauron, claiming to be a messenger of the Valar and addressing himself as Anatar, or the Lord of Gifts, appeared in Ostin Edhil and offered his wisdom to the Gwaithir Myrdain. Before commencing the task of constructing the Rings of Power, Celebrimbor, as well as the Gwaithir Myrdain, built numerous lesser rings under the supervision and tutelage of Anatar. According to legend, Celebrimbor handed one of his rings to the king of Khazad Dûm, Durin III. Celebrimbor fashioned 3 rings on his own, the most magnificent and loveliest of the Rings of Power, using the wisdom he learned from Anatar. Because only Celebrimbor touched them, these rings remained devoid of Sauron's corrupting influence. The rings were called Nenya, Narya and Vilya after the forces of water, fire and air respectively. Celebrimbor dispatched Vilya and Narya to Gil-galad and Círdan in Lindon respectively, and then Nenya to Galadriel at Lothlorien.
This is Nenya, the Ring of Adamant.
Sauron covertly created the One Ring at Orodruin about SA 1600, allowing him to dominate Middle-earth by claiming authority over each of the Rings of Power as well as their bearers. But when Sauron put on the One Ring in order to dominate the consciences of those who wore the weaker rings, the elves who wore the three immediately became conscious of Sauron's deception and scheme. He then began to prepare for war. In retaliation, Sauron attacked Eregion in SA 1695, wreaking havoc on the kingdom. The Nine were kidnapped during the sack of Eregion, and Celebrimbor was tortured into revealing the location of the Seven, but he refused to give the locations of the three elvish rings. In subsequent years, Sauron acquired the rest of the rings and utilized them as tools of evil, especially against men. Celebrimbor perished in SA 1697 from his agony. With the probable exception of Maglor, he was the last direct ancestor of Feanor. His arrow-shot body was put on a pike and paraded as a banner by Sauron's armies when they attacked the elves.
Bound together in death, crafted the one thing that could challenge Sauron, a ring of power.
The other versions of Celebrimbor's Origins. A 4th century pagan worship temple was discovered at Lydney Park, Gloucestershire in 1928. Tolkien was requested to look at a Latin inscription found there. Dwarf's Hill was the Anglo-Saxon name for the location, and Tolkien, a skilled philologist, traced the word Nodens back to the Irish hero Nuada Aragidlov, also known as Nuada of the Silver Hand, in 1932. Tolkien expert Tom Shippey considered this to be a seminal inspiration for Tolkien's Middle-earth, incorporating dwarfs, a ring, a god hero, as well as a silver hand. According to the J.R.R. Tolkien Encyclopedia, Matthew Lyons noticed the hobbit-like aspect of Dwarf's Hill's mineshaft excavations, and Tolkien was particularly interested in the hill's mythology during his time there, according to Lydney curator Sylvia Jones. According to Helen Armstrong, the location may have spawned Celebrimbor as well as the ruined lands of Eregion and Moria. Celebrimbor is Sindarin, meaning silver hand, according to English literature expert John M. Bowers, and because the area was locally known as Dwarf's Hill and was riddled with old mines, it readily presented itself as the setting for the Lonely Mountain as well as the mines of Moria. Celebrimbor was created for the backstory of The Lord of the Rings without any backstory in the first publication before 1966. Afterwards, Tolkien attempted to write a brief history to link him with the Elder Days. He was characterized as a Noldor victim of Gondolin, who had previously been one of Turgon's finest artificers in a paragraph concerning Galadriel and Celeborn. He survived the fall and subsequently became a companion of Celeborn and Galadriel despite his pride and nearly dwarfish fascination with crafts. Tolkien, however, noted in a comment next to the passage that it might be wiser to portray him as a distant relative of Feanor. As a result, a suitable line regarding this was added to the second edition's Appendix B. Tolkien then continued to determine which of Feanor's children would give birth to Celebrimbor. A side note describes their children and wives, stating that Maglor, Caranthir, and Curufin were married, concluding that Curufin, dearest to his father and primary possessor of his father's abilities, had a son who happened to come alongside him into banishment, though his nameless wife didn't. Christopher Tolkien based the Silmarillion on this text, in which Celebrimbor is the child of Curufin who stayed in Nargothrond after his father was banished. Tolkien, completely disregarding the published statement, investigated alternate explanations. In a 1968 piece, Celebrimbor is described as a Telerin silversmith who accompanied Celeborn to Middle-earth and ended up in Eregion, enthralled by the silver-like metal mithril. He identifies as being a Sindar and a descendant of Daeron from Doriath, who proceeded to use his runic alphabet in Eregion in Of Dwarves and Men from 1969 or later.
Middle-earth is in great peril, Celebrimbor.
Show me.
My mirror shows many things.
His tragic love story, the unrequited love for Galadriel. Tolkien had written a few other things about Galadriel about the time he wrote the chapters of her narrative that appear in the official Silmarillion. One of these primarily affected the Elisar, and this was an elfstone, a lovely green crystal said to contain the sun's brightness. Tolkien authored an article sometime in the 1950s describing two separate versions of the Elisar's beginnings. It's unclear whether he couldn't decide which he preferred or if he was simply trying to add dimension to the myths, but the two accounts are remarkably distinct with some startling parallels. We're informed that Eärendil wore the first Elisar created by a person named Enethil when he fled Middle-earth. However, the two accounts differed, as there also was an LSR afterward in the Third Age. Some said that the ancient LSR had been restored to Middle-earth by the Valar's favour. In contrast, others claimed that it was a new LSR concocted by Celebrimbor. According to the first story, Olorin took the initial LSR with him after he came from the west. Gandalf's name in Valinor was Olorin. Galadriel was dwelling in Greenwood the Great when Gandalf discovered her. She confessed to Gandalf that her absence from Valinor was wearing on her. Despite her desire for news from her kin, she was hesitant to abandon Middle-earth. Gandalf told her that she wept in Middle-earth after he told her what he knew. Gandalf inquired if she desired the LSR, but she stated that it was lost, and he wondered whether Middle-earth would then wane and perish forever. Her rage at the Valar was once again shown, as she hoped that they were long gone. But Gandalf, on the other hand, corrected her, saying that they were still an essential part of everything. As a memento, he gave her the LSR that he had brought from Yavanna. He told her to employ it as she pleased. For a period of time, she would make her home the most beautiful sight in Middle-earth. He told her that it wasn't hers and that she had to pass it on to someone who went by the name LSR. This is the most compatible version with the Lord of the Rings. Galadriel gave the gem to her child Celebrian, who passed it on to Arwen, Galadriel's grandchild, who returned it to Galadriel, who handed it back to Aragorn. His name became Elessar later on. The story doesn't explain how Galadriel obtained this stone, but there's another narrative that the elves supposedly recounted that didn't include Gandalf at all. Those who heard this story considered the Elessar during the Eldar days, as well as the Elessar during the Third Age, as two separate stones. Celebrimbor constructed the second one before the formation of the Rings of Power. Galadriel had arrived in Eregion, where she met Celebrimbor and confessed to him, stating that she mourned in Middle-earth, for the place of her residence is filled with grief that no spring can heal. Celebrimbor inquired whether she intended to cross the sea. She stated that even if her family had left, she would remain. Galadriel is becoming darker in this depiction. Death and dying worried her in Middle-earth, but she couldn't overcome her pride and implore the Valar for mercy. Because the ban on the Noldor had been removed by this point, and most of her kin had gone to the west, this version nearly implies a ban upon her specifically. But most importantly, she was staying because she felt more powerful here. And, like Valinor, she desired this world to be eternal, but not Valinor, for she couldn't reign there. Galadriel was dangerously close to Sauron with her desire to rule and be powerful. Celebrimbor, just like Gandalf during the preceding rendition, inquired about the Elessar, at which point Galadriel, like before, acknowledged that it was lost. She wondered whether Middle-earth had to fade and die forever. Celebrimbor, unlike Gandalf, didn't have a replacement elfstone in his bag. However, he was a fantastic artisan. He stated that he loved her, even if she had committed to Celeborn of the Trees. He added that he would do anything he could to ease her pain with his work. This is actually heartbreaking. Celebrimbor had feelings for Galadriel, who was wedded to Celeborn, a lowly Sindarin elf. It had to have confused and depressed poor Celebrimbor, who, just like Galadriel, was a Noldor, but it was due to this unrequited love that he created his finest work, with the exception of the 3 rings. This Elessar had a faint and more transparent green tint than the original, but it had less strength. The explanation for this is enthralling. The original was illuminated by the sun while it was forming. It was more powerful back then. Even after Morgoth had been thrown out, his dark shadow upon it remained. Until the arrival of the darkness in the forest, it had been the Elessar that kept Galadriel's kingdom eternal. As a result, when Sauron conquered Dol Guldur about the year 1050 during the Third Age, the Elessar's might was overshadowed, and the forest shriveled and became Mirkwood. Celebrimbor created the 3 elvish rings during the period of 1500-ish of the Second Age, and delivered the ring Nenya, the leader of the 3, to Galadriel. This contradicts the statement in The Lord of the Rings that Elrond's ring has the most tremendous power. Galadriel appears to have possessed the Elessar for some 100 years before getting the Ring of Power. But keep in mind that Galadriel couldn't even use the ring until the beginning of the Third Age, which is when the One Ring was destroyed by Sauron. Galadriel evidently employed both the Ring of Power as well as the Elessar to keep her kingdom all flowery from the beginning of the Third Age until around 1050-ish, which is when Sauron captured much of Mirkwood. She no longer required the Elessar now that she possessed the Elvish Ring and was unable to control Mirkwood any longer, and handed it to Celebrian, her child, who passed it to Arwen, who ended up giving it to Aragorn. The prophecy of Return of the King developed out of this. Tolkien never discussed Celebrimbor's affection for Galadriel anywhere else. Celebrimbor's plight. What did Celeborn possess that he lacked? Tolkien also flirted with the concept of Celebrimbor creating both the initial and second LSRs.
He could do nothing but stare into their depths. It was only after one of his tears fell upon the jewels.
Why do we think Celebrimbor will be an extremely important character in the Rings of Power? Celebrimbor first appears when Gil-galad introduces Elrond to him in Lindon. He is already a great craftsman. Celebrimbor takes Elrond back to Ostin Edhill in Eregion, where he shows him his grandpa Feanor's hammer and speaks to him of his own ambition to build something really meaningful. This necessitates the construction of a forge larger than any yet constructed, which the elves lack. Because of his relationship with Dwarf Prince Durin IV, Elrond undertakes to try to create a partnership between Eregion as well as Khazad Dûm. Elrond marches with Celebrimbor to Khazad Dûm's west gate, but Elrond enters alone. Elrond visits Celebrimbor's workshop in Amazon Prime's The Rings of Power, which contains several artifacts like Feanor's hammer, which is used to build the Silmarils. Celebrimbor will be in charge of crafting the 3 elven rings, ignorant of the binding magic Sauron has infused them with. Celebrimbor, on the other hand, intends to go one step further by erecting a tower equipped with a smithing furnace. The Rings of Power would be manufactured in this furnace, making it one of the most essential places in the show. Galadriel, still mourning her brother's demise, believes the darkness of Sauron silently looms over Middle-earth. She's correct. While Sauron has historically had considerable power over humans, he's predestined to endeavour to achieve his goals with the assistance of the elves. He'll make the journey to Celebrimbor's workshop and form friendships with the smiths under the guise of Anatar, also known as the Lord of Gifts. Although some elves, especially Celebrimbor, are skeptical, they'll be duped into creating the Rings of Power. There will be 19 rings made, 3 for the elves, 7 for the dwarves, and 9 for mankind. Although the majority of the Rings of Power will be forged at Celebrimbor's forge, Sauron will create the One Ring in secret. It'll be made on Mount Doom in what will become Mordor. All of this makes Celebrimbor one of the most significant figures in The Lord of the Rings of Power. In fact, he's one of the most pivotal characters in Middle-earth's history, as he's credited with the ring's creation. Thankfully for the writers and the showrunners, just the broad strokes of Celebrimbor's narrative are shown, giving them leeway as they draw Celebrimbor's tale to life. Viewers will undoubtedly find their thrills in the details.
A tower. One that can host a forge.
Why is he in such a hurry to build his tower forge in the Rings of Power? Celebrimbor, played by Charles Edwards, was introduced in the first 2 episodes of the Amazon Prime show when a fresh-faced Elrond was dispatched to Eregion, the domain of elven smiths, to assist Celebrimbor in building a tower that would house a forge capable of producing a flame as fiery as a dragon's tongue and as true as starlight. The only difficulty is that Celebrimbor demands it on a practically impossible timeframe. Celebrimbor has not directly revealed why the undertaking is on such a short timeline, but his desire to leave a mark on Middle-earth could be the answer. He is very popular among the elves, but he wishes for more. He recounted to Elrond during the Rings of Power's 2nd episode how their race caused violence to these shores an age ago, and how he wants to fill them with beauty, to progress beyond petty jewel craft and create something truly powerful. He's determined to leave his imprint, just as his grandfather Feanor did before him. Constructing the finest forge imaginable on Middle-earth in a short amount of time will undoubtedly create an impression on his name. Celebrimbor may already have his first creature in mind, or Sauron may have begun his poisoning of the elves, which contributes to his desire to construct his forge as soon as possible. Celebrimbor's workshop is where 19 of the 20 Rings of Power have been produced. Therefore, he'll undoubtedly stay true to his personal ambitions of creating something powerful. According to the book, Sauron shared his expertise with Celebrimbor and assisted him in the creation of 16 of the rings. Celebrimbor created 3 rings on his own, the Ring of Air, Vilya, the Ring of Fire, Narya, and the Ring of Water, Nenya, which became the 3 Rings of Power bestowed upon the elves in The Lord of the Rings. Despite the fact that the elves refused the rings right as Sauron's plot was exposed, they had a significant involvement in their development. Because Celebrimbor's forge is the genesis of Sauron's ultimate story, it'll play an important part in the Rings of Power. Without Celebrimbor and his mighty forge, Sauron's ambitions and the occurrences of The Lord of the Rings wouldn't ever come to completion. The Forge, as well as Celebrimbor himself, haven't received much attention in the books or films prior to the Rings of Power series. They're described mainly in Tolkien's writings on Middle-earth's history, but this pivotal event in Lord of the Rings history is now being brought to life. Celebrimbor and his Forge are undoubtedly preparing to play a significant part in the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power.
What do you want?
It is Elrond of Lindon, accompanied by Celebrimbor, Lord of Origins.
What makes him such a unique character? Celebrimbor, unlike his grandfather and father, was selfless and compassionate, and he was neither proud nor haughty of what he built. He was described as having a dwarfish passion for crafts, and he rose to prominence as an artificer and craftsman in both Gondolin as well as Eregion. His passion for crafts brought him to Eregion, and he was exposed to mithril, a rare metal. Dwarves mined mithril at adjacent Khazad-dûm, eventually renamed Moria. For many years, Moria and Eregion swapped knowledge and secrets along the high road, and the elves built a strong connection with the dwarfs that resided in Moria. But the long era of peace would not endure, as when Celebrimbor saw the traps Sauron had set for him, he was overwhelmed with concern and anguish for his men, and was afterward regarded as the brave defender of Eregion. Conclusion. Celebrimbor's desire to create a new workshop in Eregion will very probably tie into his main plot in Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power. While we can't predict what'll happen next in Amazon Prime's TV series, Episode 2 does an excellent job of building the groundwork for Celebrimbor's future successes and blunders. While the first 2 episodes somewhat understate Celebrimbor's relevance, he's a figure you should keep an eye on going ahead. Fans are likely to see a lot more about Celebrimbor in the future, particularly if the Rings of Power decides to stay true to the foundations set up by Tolkien. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.